25 is where we're going to be at today. We're wrapping up. Maybe you haven't been with us. Maybe you're new. I'm glad you're here with us today. Maybe you've been, doing things and you just haven't been with us. But we've been in a series. We're wrapping up today called Mindset, Every Thought Captive. And I'm kind of sad we're done with it because this is one that like speaks to me, right? I needed to learn to take my thoughts captive because my thoughts run away all the time. I find myself going down dark paths, and I find myself thinking about things I shouldn't be thinking about. I don't think I'm a whole lot different than you are, and by some of the conversations that we've had over the last few weeks, I think that's probably the case. I think we all needed to hear just a little bit of this. Every thought captive. It comes from 2 Corinthians 10:5. That's the Apostle Paul saying this is what we do. This is how we deal with living. It's not that we have to change all of our actions because that's really hard to do. What we need to do is we've got to start with our thoughts. We've got to take our thoughts captive. In fact, Paul in another place, Romans 12:2 says, I want you not to be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And what we've talked about is that science is just now confirming what the Apostle Paul told us 2,000 years ago, is that it is possible to renew our minds. It is possible to capture our thoughts. It is possible for us to reshape and rewire our brains and to change the structure of our thinking. And so we've been talking about how do we do that? Week number one, that was kind of what we did. We can actually change the way that we think about things and change the patterns. And then we've spent the last couple of weeks talking about some of those patterns of the world. We're not going to cover them all, but they're the ones that I think you and I struggle with, like the pattern of distraction. Just trying to not think about anything, and so we just go into this distractive period, and we think that if we just let our minds go, that'll somehow calm us, and really it does the opposite, doesn't it? It brings anxiety and it brings depression. It does exactly the opposite, and so we try to distract. That doesn't work. And we talked about how do we deal with the pattern of distraction. We talked last week about the pattern of pleasure, and how we kind of go down a thought pattern that gets us there. It starts by me saying that I need to have certain things in my life to make me happy, and I need those things to happen now, and the circumstances of my life, if they'll change, then I'll be happy. And we just go down this pathway, and we find ourselves doing things that we never would have thought we would have done, except it started with a thought. All of this starts with a thought. We have to take our thoughts captive, or our thoughts will take us captive. So I want to talk about wrap it up with one more thought pattern that I think we struggle with, and I'm going to call it the pattern of despair. I probably don't even need to introduce this to you because I think most of us recognize the times that we live in, right? Since 1990, there has been a dramatic rise in what they call self-reported unhappiness. Basically, people just saying, I'm not happy, right? People saying, I'm not happy about life. I'm not happy about circumstances. I'm not happy in relationships. In the last decade, we have seen a rise in what they call diseases of despair. That would be substance abuse. That would be alcohol dependency. That would be suicidal thoughts. A rise in diseases of despair. Since 1999, there's been a dramatic increase in what they call deaths by despair. That would include suicide. That would include drug poisoning, alcohol poisoning, liver disease, cirrhosis of the liver, all of those things. My guess is almost every adult in here probably knows somebody that has died because of a death by despair. Rates of depression in the United States, all-time record highs. In fact, experts are calling our time the age of anxiety. Anxiety disorders ranking as the most common mental health issues that they're struggling with. Some 40 million adults in the U.S. would say they've got something in that anxiety disorder area. Like all of the patterns that we've talked about, and even the ones we haven't talked about, there's a way of thinking. And there's a way of thinking that leads to despair. And I want to kind of just talk about this spiral with you, because I think this is kind of how it leads into things. It starts with what we call distorted thinking, right? We think something, and so we view an event or a situation in some inaccurate way. We look at it and we see it differently than it really is, and we put it in some kind of negative light. And we may overgeneralize it. That's where you draw broad conclusions from just little evidence. Or we may personalize it. That's when you attribute something bad that's happened to something that you did. And so I'm at fault. If I wouldn't have done that, then this wouldn't have happened. And so we personalize it, or sometimes we catastrophize it. And when we do that, what we're doing is we assume the worst thing is going to happen. And so it usually starts with some kind of distorted thinking. Starts with a thought. Distorted thinking then leads to discouragement. That's when we begin to dwell on the negative thoughts without seeking a solution, without looking for a positive way to really observe it. We begin to judge ourselves. We begin to blame ourselves. It causes us then to lose confidence, causes us to lose enthusiasm, and we find ourselves in discouragement. Discouragement, as we keep going in this spiral, leads to disillusionment. And so as we move along here, we wonder if our expectations have been unrealistic. We start to lose faith in the things that things can get better or that things can improve. We wonder if there's anything we can even do about it. Maybe our efforts are all futile. So we find ourselves in disillusionment. Disillusionment then is what leads us into despair. We feel like there's no solution. We feel like there's nothing that can improve, nothing it can be possible, and we basically move into a state of resignation. We decide that we're helpless, we're hopeless, we're trapped in the situation, and we come to the conclusion that there's no way out. Just in 4 easy steps, from distorted thinking to discouragement to disillusionment to despair. Some of you can relate to that because you've been there. And you're like, that's exactly what happened to me. Maybe I didn't use the right words or the right terms or whatever, but I found myself there in a time of despair. Some of you, that would describe where you're at right now. You've been walking through life and you began to walk through this thought process, and then you're discouraged, disillusioned, and you are right now in a time of despair. And so here's the question that we're going to talk about today is, when we're there, when we're in that spiral and maybe we're all the way into a period of despair, what can we do to renew our minds? What can we do then to be transformed? What can we do to capture our thoughts in this situation? How can we stop the progression of me being dragged further and further into despair? Let me start with the good news. The good news is you're not alone. Good news is there's lots of people walking that path, have walked that path. In fact, maybe the really good news is that one of the greatest men of all time, who was known as a man after God's own heart, knew what it was like to walk in despair. You know, many of the Psalms were written by King David, not all of them, but many of them were written by him. And lots of them were Psalms of celebration and praise. I mean, you could probably think through some of them. We sing some of those Psalms, in fact, some about celebration and praise, but many of them deal with the issue, the darkness of despair. In fact, you may not know this, but out of the 150 Psalms that you have in your Bible, about 40 of them, in fact, a little over 40 of them, are what we call Psalms of lament. And they're issues where David or others is talking about a time where things are not going well, a time where they're being chased or pursued, a time when they feel the emptiness and despair of needing God and crying out to Him, Psalms of lament. And so in Psalm 55, I hope you're there. I want you to read along. If you have any possible way of looking along with this, I want you to read it with me, because we're going to point out some specific things that David does very very intentionally. What he does is it's almost revealing to us. He's going to make 6 shifts in his thinking as you read through Psalm 55. And here's what I want you to think about. Write them down, but I want you to think about one shift that you need to make in your thinking. Don't try to do all of them. Write them all down. But I want you to think about, this is the one that I need to take home today, okay? I'm going to give you 6. Just write down one. This is the one that I'm going to take with me and I'm going to deal with today, okay? I want you to see, first of all, that David makes this shift. I'm going to call it the shift from self-reliance to dependence. The shift from self-reliance to dependence. Back lots of years ago, my little kids, they were little. And we had family coming to town for Thanksgiving. And my wife made this decision that we needed to get some things ready in the house. I did not make that decision, but my wife made that for us. And I'm really thankful for that decision that she made for us. And so here was the plan that we made, okay? We decided we were going to paint the whole living room and get it looking good for family coming in for Thanksgiving. You know, we didn't have anything else to do for the holidays, and so let's paint. And I'm like, I can do that. I got this. Now, what you need to know, because I know some of you are thinking, what kind of princess are you that you're not, wanting to paint? That's easy stuff. Well, the house we lived in had like cathedral ceilings. I mean, they were like 30 feet high, right? And I'm like, I'm good to about 8 feet. And beyond that, but I got this. I'm going to borrow a ladder. And so I borrowed my friend John Winstead. John works here at the church, and borrowed his ladder. And I've got the 8-foot done now. I'm up getting all the high stuff. And it is getting late that night before family's going to show up. I'm like, I got it. We're good. One little section to do, grab the ladder, lean it against the wall, start climbing up, and guess what the ladder does? Into the wall. Now, not only do I have just this little spot of wall that has not been painted, now I have 2 big ladder holes in the wall, and I'm done. I no longer have it. I no longer got this, right? I'm at the point now where I'm just discouraged. I'm disillusioned. Who would want to paint their house? Why would we do this? Why did we decide to do this? And it was not pretty. And fortunately, we got to the point. In fact, Andrea called John and said, John, Greg needs help. And I concurred, okay? I agreed with that decision right there. I think we all kind of walk this path, this fine line, don't we, where in life it's easy for us to go, I got this. I can do this. I can handle it. It's not that big a deal. And then something goes wrong. And then our thoughts turn to discouragement. And here's what happens when we get to that point. We can do one of 2 things. We can either continue to go on our own, and we kind of double down and like, I'm going to do this. If God's not going to help me, I'm just going to do it. If nobody else is going to be with me, I'll deal with it. We can either do that, or we can say to ourselves, I need help. I need somebody to walk through this with me. Look what David says, the very first 2 verses of Psalm 55. Listen to my prayer, O God. Do not ignore my plea. Hear me and answer me. My thoughts trouble me, and I am distraught. And I love what he does there. Maybe you grew up in a household or grew up in a church where it wasn't okay for you to feel anxious or to feel afraid. It wasn't okay to express your feelings, and so maybe you've kind of grown up with that, and you're that independent spirit. I want you to see what David's doing right here. David is vulnerable in his prayer. He cries for help. He's asking God, pleading with God. And we tend to think of David as kind of a no-fear guy, right? Because we think of him when he's fighting Goliath. David and Goliath, he's not afraid of anything. But look in this situation. He's like, God, I need you. He pleads with God for help. Admitting our need takes a lot of courage. Maybe that's the shift that you need to make right there, is one from just your own self-reliance and independent spirit to say, God, I need you. I'm dependent upon you. I'm reliant upon you. I need your help. Or I want you to notice this second one. It's the shift from general to specific, from generic to specific. At this point in what we've read, we don't know what David's struggling with. We don't know what the issue with, right? He just says, God, I cry out to you. I need your help. Hear me, answer me. I'm distraught, those kinds of things. But what we're going to see is that David is going to get very specific with what is going on in his life and tell God exactly what that is. Look at verse 3. We find out it's because of what my enemy is saying, because of the threats of the wicked. For they bring down suffering on me, and they assail me in their anger. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. And so what we see early on is that there are these enemies of David that are coming after him. They're chasing him. They're pursuing him. He feels threatened. He's afraid. He's overwhelmed with things to the point where it says he's afraid of dying. Right? He's so afraid something terrible is going to happen to him. Then he mentions something else a little later that he's got a friend that has betrayed him. I want you to skip all the way down to verse 20 with me. Look what he says there. He says, my companion attacks his friends. He violates his covenant. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. And so somebody that David knows and considers a friend is talking bad about him, maybe talking behind his back. It sounds like they're gossiping about him, and yeah, it's not a good relationship there. Some of you have experienced that. Maybe some of you are experiencing that right now, where some people that you considered friends or some family, and you're dealing with now this messy relationship because you feel betrayed by them. You feel hurt by them. They've said things to you. They've said things behind your back about you. And you have some feelings like David does of, God, I need you here. I need your help in this. I mean, what David does in this situation is he gets really, really specific about what he is going through. And so here's what I think. When thoughts are really general, when they're just generic, then we tend to get overwhelmed by them. There is something that is threatening to us about undefined fear. It's the fear of the unknown, right? We don't know, and so it causes a rise in the level of our fear when we don't know what that is, the fear of the unknown. It can be easy to do that when we're talking about money. You have bills to pay, and you've got this debt that's mounting, and you don't have anything in your savings account. And to you, when you look at that general feeling about your financial situation, it feels impossible and it feels desperate. One of the things that we learn when we start talking to people that help in situations like that is you got to start writing it down. And so you start writing down all the bills that you owe. You write down every one of them, no matter how big, no matter how small. Let's put it all on paper. Let's account for it. Let's start to make a plan where we're going to start, what we're going to do first, what we're going to tackle first. And when you make a plan, when you write it all down, it doesn't feel quite as overwhelming, and in fact feels much more doable. You've identified it. It's not unknown. It's not just general. It's not just out there. There is a power in naming it, in labeling it. In fact, a lot of research has been done that shows that when you put feelings into words, it can help regulate our emotional experience. That's why those of you that have gone to see a therapist, oftentimes they're saying, tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you're experiencing there, because they know the value of putting some kind of label to it. It makes it less intense. And so one of the things that we see David doing right here is he makes a shift from being just general to very specific. God, here's exactly what's going on in my life. Here's the third shift. The shift from my way to God's way. The shift from my way to God's way. David tells God how he would like to deal with his feelings in the situation. He writes it down for us here in Psalm 55. This is David's plan. This is David saying, this is what I'm going to do with my current situation, God. I said, verse 6, I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm. That's what David's saying. This is how I want to deal with it. And here's the deal. We've all felt exactly that way. We just want to get out of here. We just want to get out of the problem, get out of the situation, get out of the circumstance. We just want to run. And so a lot of times what we say is, I need a vacation. I need some time off. I need to get away from all of this. And so what happens is we plan this little getaway, or we plan this long getaway, and we plan it. And guess what? We go and we have a great time, and then we come back and we're right back in the same spot, aren't we? We got away, but it didn't fix the problem. I need to get away. Or this is what we do sometimes. We don't just say, I'm going to get away. We say, I need away from people. And we alienate ourselves. We go hide out. We stay to ourselves. We don't feel like going to church. We don't feel like going and doing the things that we normally do. We get in that time of despair, and we don't want to be around people. We just get away. We want to run. David knows that his way is not the right way. That's not working. By the way, you probably have learned just getting away or alienating yourself from people in a time of despair, that's not a good way to deal with that. If at any point, that's when you need people in your life. It is not a good solution to run away. David recognizes that, and so David does something different. He invites God into it. Look at verse 16. He says, as for me, this is what I want to do, but as for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Instead of running, instead of flying like a dove, David says, no, I'm going to choose to pursue God. I'm going to choose to chase after him. So let me just ask you, what is your normal way of dealing with this, with thoughts of despair and times of despair? Maybe you're like David and your option is to run, or maybe you're one that likes to fight or double down on everything. Here's what David would say. This is the shift that we need to make, to invite God into it and to seek him and to pursue him. The shift from my way to God's way. Here's the fourth one. It's the shift from intermittent to consistent. The shift from intermittent to consistent. David identifies his concerns. Verse 16, he prays to God. And you may be thinking, well, I feel like I do that. I feel like I do that and nothing happens. Or I feel like I do that when I'm feeling desperate, right? I mean, that's a normal response for us. God, I really need you right now. I need your help. But when we read verse 16, as for me, I call to God, the Lord saves me. Look what he says in verse 17. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. So David's strategy for dealing with distress and despair is to do this, to pray morning, and to pray at noon, and to pray at night. In other words, David prays when he's desperate, and he prays even when he's not desperate. He takes his thoughts captive. It's regular. He does it all the time. And so I'm just wondering, in your times of desperation, instead of just during the heat of the moment, instead of just the really terrible time, what if you took a few minutes first thing in the morning and just got a God perspective on things? God, I'm yours. This day is yours. I don't know what you have in store for me, but let me honor you. Just get a right perspective on it. Middle of the day, what if you just took some time and said, God, I'm going to recenter myself. I need you. I've already had distractions and things going on today, but I'm going to now focus on you. What if at the end of the day, you just said, God, I just want to thank you for what did good happen to me today, what I enjoyed today. What I want to make sure that there are some things that I express my gratitude to God for at the end of the day and express my thanks to Him. God, I need you. Thank you for what you've done. Maybe the shift that you need to make is something similar to that. From intermittent to consistent. Or maybe it's this one, shift number 5, the shift from talking to God to talking to himself about God. I know I'll have to explain that one a little bit. The shift from talking to God to talking to himself about God. David starts off by being really honest with God about his despair. But here's the shift. Then he begins to be honest with himself about who God is. He stops talking to God about his despair at some point, and he starts talking to his despair about God. It's in verse 18 and 19. He rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. God, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change, he will hear them and humble them because they have no fear of God. At some point, he stops talking to God about what's going on in his life, and he starts talking to himself about the God who is in charge, and the God who is in control, and the God who will humble his enemies, and the God who will rescue him. What David is doing is he's renewing his mind by telling himself the truth about God. See, the way we ultimately overcome negative thoughts is to capture our thoughts and to make them obedient to Christ. And one of the thought patterns that leads to despair, it's called rumination, right? Rumination is when we worry about, have kind of this consistent negative thinking, repetitive thoughts. We just continue to just let them build up and move. It's just a constant thing. That is rumination. It leads to additional despair. It can be about past mistakes. It can be about embarrassing moments. It can be about unresolved conflict. It can be about worries about the future. And you've all done that. We've all done that where we've just sat there and let those things kind of loop through our minds. We think about our problems over and over. It's called rumination. Sometimes instead what we need to do is to remind ourselves of who God is and what God has done and what God will do. We talk to God and then we talk to ourselves about God. He's got this. He's got me. I don't need to worry. In fact, that would be the 6th shift that we see made in Psalm 55. It's the shift from worry to worship. David isn't worried anymore when we get to verse 22, right? Look what he says. Cast your cares on the Lord and he will sustain you. Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain. Now, I want to remind you what he started with in verse 1. Listen to my prayer, oh God. Don't ignore my plea. My thoughts trouble me. I'm distraught. Get to the end of the psalm. What's he saying? Oh, just cast your cares on the Lord. He'll take care of them. I mean, that's a big transition, right? A transition from worry to worship. In fact, it's really hard to do both of those at the same time, isn't it? When you worship God and you make God bigger, you put him into perspective, or you put your problems into perspective of our big God, then it's hard to worship or hard to worry at the same time. So here's what I want you to do, just by way of practice on this. This has got to be something we've got to take home with it. Would you just identify one of those 6 shifts? Would you just pick one out of that? Pick the one that you like. I think I need this. Maybe you just need to say, God, would you help me pick one right here? And I want to make sure you write it down. If you haven't written it down yet, would you write down one of those? Find a piece of paper, put it in your phone, do something, but write it down in some way. And then thirdly, I just want you to pray, Lord, would you help me to do this? Would you help me to worship instead of worry? Would you help me to shift from doing it my way to your way? Would you help me to be very specific instead of just being general? Would you help me to identify and be very specific about what's going on in my life? Would you just find one, pick one, and say, God, would you help me to shift? Would you help me to move from despair to trusting you? Pray with me. Father, we thank you for teaching us today, because we all get this. We all struggle in some degree of keeping our thoughts in a positive, aligned way, and not getting on some spiral where we wind up in despair. Father, I know there are people right now in this room that are feeling very hopeless, and they are struggling, and they are in the throes of despair. And I'm praying right now that you would encourage them, because you are the God who rescues. You are the God who saves, and I'm praying that you would give them a glimmer of hope right now. Father, for those that are on somewhere in that spiral, I'm praying that you're going to help us change the way that we think about things. Father, for those that maybe this isn't an issue right now, would you help them to be an encouragement, help them to be available, to be there for people. We love you, and we're grateful for your promises. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.